let me start recording. Okay, this week's Torah portion is Parashat Yitro, which thematically feels basically like two Torah portions to me. And I love both of them. So here's like the basic summary to start off with. The first half, 2/3 maybe, of the Torah portion is Yitro or Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, coming to where the Israelites are camped at the base of Mount Sinai and giving Moses advice. And there's several things I love about this. One is that the relationship between Moses and his father-in-law are really lovely. It's, it's like a good, loving, respectful relationship. Yitro gives him advice. Moses actually takes it. Then Yitro wants to go back to his own people, and Moses like begs him to stay. And and there's there's so much mutual respect here and like care for what each of them bring to the relationship and to their separate roles as leaders. I mean, Yitro is also the high priest of Midian, so they both know what it is to be a leader, and they clearly have respect for each other's leadership roles, which I just think is so lovely. And then after Yitro does go back to his native land, then we get the 10 Commandments. And so this is obviously like a very important, this is like the cornerstone of Judaism right here. This is an important parsha. There's several things that go on here besides the commandments themselves that is worth noting. So one is that the Israelites are terrified, and they send Moses up to Mount Sinai for the rest of the commandments to do the rest, that they don't want to hear God's voice anymore. It's too scary. Another thing is that in hearing God's voice, it's so, God is so beyond just voice that they see the thunder and they hear the lightning. Like all of their senses get like flip-flopped, and it's like everybody suddenly has synesthesia, and it's very dramatic and terrifying and everything. And let's see. And then also just another note, much like last week's parsha with we talked about how it's laid out in the Torah itself so that it looks like the sea. In the 10 Commandments, the way that they are spaced and laid out in the Torah, they kind of form the two tablets when you look at it in the script, in the scroll itself, which is neat. So that's my summary. Brandy, you already have your hand up. You're on mute.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
The one thing I noticed was that the Parshat, like the one that was sent out in the email, says that this ends on 2026, but in Sepharia, mine ends at verse 24.
Yeah.
And I was like, where's the last two verses?
Oh, that was probably a typo. Yeah.
23.
Yeah, there is no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the end.
I apologize. That was my error.
Oh, okay. All right. I was like, is there
not the Torah's error, my error.
Is there another version of this book that that has more verses? Okay.
Well, Debbie is a librarian, maybe.
Occasionally you will find different, breakups for other texts, but the Torah is pretty much every version, every translation of the Torah has the same verse numbering that I've seen. Yes, Joel.
Actually, there is one exception. in this
Okay.
week's Parsha, Yitro. When it comes to the Ten Commandments, now I'm very used to the Notes Ream. The Notes Ream is the Christian tradition of breaking up chapters differently. And so, of course, we just adjust to it, no problem. But I did notice that when it comes to the Ten Commandments, not only do the Christian have a different numbering system, even within our own group, we have what we call Chabad. Chabad are the guys with the black hats and the black suits. Their numbering system is different from ours. And even Sepharia is different from my more traditional, older, what I call the Mamre tradition. So
Wait.
it's not only there, but it's here also. But I think that's the only place.
Huh. Well, now I'm gonna look at Chabad. So is Chabad and Mamre the same?
No, all
No.
three are slightly
All
different.
three are different.
And the reason is, like, for example, the first commandment, I am the Lord thy God that took you out of the land of Egypt. That's number one, according to some traditions. Now they start verse 2. Other traditions, they combine 1 and 2 together. And also that also proceeds throughout the list.
Well, maybe that explains, I actually take the verse numbers from the front of my Tanakh. It lists the weekly Sabbath readings, and they do say to verse 26, even though it only goes to 23 in their version of the book.
Which
So
Chumash are you using?
it's who's JPS.
Which is the same, I'm pretty sure, as what's on Sepharia is the new JP. You have the big brown one, right?
No, I have the blue one, the old blue one.
Oh,
So actually, I think there's just a little bit of fun with that, because in the very beginning, I was thrown off by it. And now I just kind of, it's like surfing or something. You know, you kind of like the higher waves once you get into it.
wait. That's not what I wanted. Exodus 20. Now I'm looking at Mamre. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, so according to the online versions anyway, Chabad. Oh, wait, no. That's so weird. Okay. So Chabad has verse 1 and 2. So the Lord said to Moses, and then the first commandment has them together. Mamre has the Lord spoke to Moses first, but then the first and second commandment together as verse 2. And then Sepharia has each of those separately. But then wouldn't Sepharia have the most verses? So who's got 26 verses?
I think, I'll bet it was a typo, that's all in the
Okay.
on the page. Because why would they have 26 in their table of contents, basically, and then only have 23 on the page? So that's probably, unless they got it from someplace else, I don't know.
Okay.
That being said, we have to remind everyone that the actual Hebrew text is identical wherever you go. You can go to Sephardim, wherever you go, it's the same. And it has been for around, I think, at least 2,300 years.
And because in the scroll, there's no
Numbers.
punctuation. There's no way to really tell in the scroll itself the way that it's been, the way that there's the most consistency, as Joel said, for the last over to 1,000 years. There's no way to tell where one verse ends and the next begins. There's, some way, like some sections have like gaps, or they have the samech and the pay that we've talked about before. Actually, those aren't in the text either, but there'll be a space. And then of course, between books, there's a big space. So you always know when Exodus ends and Leviticus begins, there will be a good 2 inches in the scroll. Maybe it
I
depends
have
on
a
how big the scroll
Jeopardy
is, but it's significant. Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
question for
Yeah.
people. This is a difficult question. If I'm reading in a Sefer Torah, a scroll, I know where every verse ends. How do I know that? There's no numbers. There's no Arabic numbers. You don't see 2, 3, 4. There's no notation. There's no Aleph, Beit, Gimel. So how would I know where each verse ends?
Dave, do you have an answer? You're on mute.
Yep, unmute.
Nope, we still can't hear you. Yeah, there we go.
Joel, does it have anything to do with the shape or the width of the letters at the end of the line?
No.
Or is that nothing? No.
It's because Joel is very smart.
Well, that's true.
Yes.
It has to do with the Torah trope, Trope.
But you can't tell that from looking at the scroll either. You have to know the trope.
You must know it. You must know it. But every single verse ends with what we call sof pasuk. It's a special melody. And it's been with us forever, in my opinion, before writing existed. I can't document it because I don't have any MP3s from the old.
Mark says we know them, go back to about the 9th century, but it is presumed that before that there were like hand motions to teach students how the trope sounds, and so it is widely assumed that there was cantillation going back to, you know, Ezra. Anytime there's been a public reading of Torah, because music stores in your brain more efficiently. So but again, because you have to actually know the trope, it doesn't mark it in the text itself, like in the scroll. So people will sing this differently. Like if I'm looking at Safaria and I sing Vayidaber Elohim et kol hadabarim ha'ela lemor, so pasuk, versus on the lemor versus Chabad. Oh, that's not the right verse. I was like, those aren't even the same words. I'm not looking at the right thing. Okay. Vayidaber. Oh, that is the same. Okay, let's look at Mamre. Mamre had it different. No, wait. I swear a moment ago these were all different.
Now we know where the missing numbers went too. They were there, just.
Oh, weird. Okay. So verse 2 on Safaria. Oh, this is so weird. Oh, I forgot. That's why. Okay, so on Safaria and not on Chabad, that's interesting. There is a and Machon Mamre doesn't even have cantillation marks, but there is a tradition of double trope in the 10 Commandments. Like most tikkuns will show that there's like 2 sets of trope on each on each word, which makes it confusing then to read or to distinguish where the verse ends if you didn't have punctuation, because there's not a sof pasuk alone on each of those. And so Chabad removes one set, leaving the funkier trope on. So they have each of these 10 commandments ends, or each of these verses ends with a trope that's not a sof pasuk, which would be very difficult to like. I think it's meant to convey that sense confusion that the people at Mount Sinai would have felt.
Oh, cool.
Your Tikkun has 26 verses for chapter 6, or I mean chapter 20. It's very confusing. How does it do that?
Did they add
See you
something?
last number.
No, they would have broken it up different. So we
Anyway.
could spend all of today and next week figuring that out.
Yeah. All the different ways. Let's see, if you Google how many verses in Exodus chapter 20. No,
We
that
don't
doesn't
have to
come up
figure
with
it
like
out.
a
Google
regular
it.
answer. What is ESV? That's probably it's on Bible.com. It's probably a Christian English version. Oh, English Standard Version. Okay. Yeah. They have 26 verses. They don't include the Hebrew side by side. It's very interesting. So that they break up no, that's the same. I don't know. It's very confusing. Anyway, let's talk about content.
Okay.
Who's got questions or thoughts on the meat of the parsha? Yeah, Debbie, go ahead.
I really like reading, like you said, reading that part about Jethro and Moses, because usually the Torah is so sparse on details, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to flesh it out yourself. And with this one, they met each other, they bowed low, they kissed each other, they asked about each other's welfare. They had dinner together. It was like reading a novel almost. And then the way Jethro gives Moses advice, he doesn't just say, do this. He says, you're killing yourself. And the whole thing, you can just hear this conversation. And I think my memory of what we've read anyway, most of Moses's advice comes from God. And here's this guy just saying, this is a good idea. Why don't you try this? And it just made everybody human for a few minutes. It was very nice.
Yeah. It is so nice. And it's so important for Moses in his development of his leadership skills to learn how to delegate. I think that's a problem maybe born from his modesty that he like doesn't know how to ask for help. And like Jethro has to come and just say to him, you can't do this all.
Two things. One, what makes it even nicer is it's his father-in-law.
Yes.
And, I don't think it's unusual in the development of a leader to not know that it's wise to ask for help.
Right.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Go
So-
ahead, Brand.
Something
sorry.
that, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna to add to that. The number of said that Jethro was his father-in-law. It says it's like 5 in a row, I think. And I thought it interesting that then, they then came up with this scheme to enforce the law. That they're gonna enlist people to help them enforce the law. I thought maybe that was what's the word for that literary technique when you not quite foreshadowing, but like it uses the advice to implement the law this way is coming from the father-in-law.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Funny thing about you point out how often it says his father-in-law is there's one other place, at least one. I forget if it's before this or after that. I think it's before, where we get a different name. It says Moses' father-in-law, Reuel. And so there's like confusion if these are the same people. There's also a part that's definitely later where Miriam and Aaron are complaining about Moses' Ethiopian wife. Midian is not Ethiopia. And so again, there's that confusion. So is Reuel the father of the Ethiopian wife? Does Moses have 2 wives we don't know about? The standard reading is no, they're both the same. It's still just Zipporah and Jethro. But I think like, I don't know, there's something to that of like needing to continuously reestablish like who these people are and their relationship to Moses. Yeah, Joel.
Brandy, I had the same experience. I was in Morocco one time, and people there, they either speak Arabic or French. So I was speaking to them in French, and so I was introducing, this is my wife, this is my wife's sister, blah, blah, blah. So I did this like 20 times. He said, why don't you just tell them that I'm your sister-in-law? I said, I don't know how to say it. So he keep repeating it.
Oh, that's good.
Terry, did you have another thing to say earlier?
I was just gonna talk about, I thought it was interesting that God had, I'll say, his presence as a plume of dark smoke that I think it even referred to, that the people couldn't see because there wasn't an arm or a hand to see.
Mm-hmm.
And how we had just talked about anthropomorphizing God, and I just was struck that this was addressed, that God himself, herself, whatever,
Yeah.
they self, said, I don't have a hand. I don't, and that also there shouldn't be any idolatry, like symbols.
Right.
So that just felt important to me.
Yeah. I think, but I appreciate God's like awareness of people's need to
Mhm.
like concretize
Mhm.
this very non-concrete entity.
Yep.
Like, so I like this line, and I'm just looking at the Hebrew as well. Yeah, it's the same. So I will come to you in a thick cloud in order that the people may hear when I speak with you. So it's like when I was a little kid and I would come into my parents' room at night, after a nightmare or whatever, and start to talk to my mom, and she would say, "Hold on, I can't hear you. Let me put my glasses on." Like that somehow you need to be able to like see where the sound is coming from in order to hear it. I think there's something to that happening with the smoke, and yeah. Joel put in, yeah, the thing about all of Yitro's names. Yeah.
This is why it's so hard to become a rabbi. They can ask you a question like that. Oh my God. How do you manage, Rabbi Goldstein?
How do I manage?
If they would ask you something like, let's discuss the names of Yitro. It's like, oh my God. How do you keep that all straight?
Well, you don't. I mean, like I just said, I couldn't remember if the name came before or after. Yitro is the thing he is called the most. So that's his base name. The rest are like nicknames, And they don't appear as often. Like not only yeah, like Yitro is the name he is called most consistently, and most of the other names only appear once or maybe twice elsewhere. So yeah, they are clearly not really his name, but it's well accepted that they all still refer to him. And there's all kinds of commentaries and midrashic explanations for how he came to have these other names, as what you put in the chat states. And then the most common explanation for the comment about the Cushite wife is that Miriam and Aaron are just being racist and can't tell the difference between various darker skinned African tribes that aren't Israelites. So anyway. One thing that I think is interesting to always look at is the way, so we're like in agreement, right, that there are 10 commandments, but the way these verses are broken up, it's not so easy to set to delineate each 10. So like, I am the Lord your God is one. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make yourself a sculptured image. And that goes on for several verses. You shall not swear falsely. Remember the Sabbath day. Then that goes on for several verses. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder, adultery, steal. Oh wait, no. Ah, my things went. Wait, so actually, no, I misspoke before. I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods before me. Is one commandment, but it's 2 verses. And then where was I? Steal, false witness, and covet. So I don't know. It's not. When we think of the 10 commandments, I think we like to think of like 10 bullet points. Like these are the 10 most important, clearly laid out, whatever. And like that's not really how it's given. Which is just, and why are these the first 10? It's also, or the 10. We've actually have already received other commandments previously.
Does it say 10 anyplace? Or did somebody count them and decide there were 10? Just, I never thought about that before.
It's a good question. It doesn't say in here. They are, I mean, they have been, I don't know, from time immemorial
Right.
referred to as SRD Broth, like the 10 things. But I guess
Not that it
doesn't say it.
matters, but
Let's see.
okay, the first one, I am the Lord your God, is not really a commandment, it's a statement. The commandment is that you should have no other gods besides me.
Okay.
To me, verse 4 is more like an explanation of verse 3. It's like, and in case anybody wondering what that means, this is what it means.
Right. But even that, like, it's been understood differently. Like, you can't make a sculptured image of Hashem either. Like, even if you think you're still worshiping the one God that gave you these commandments, like it can't be a sculptured image of it. And some, in like very traditional older communities, I don't think there's anybody that still holds by this in living memory, but there were times when certain extremist communities wouldn't have any like visual depictions of any, like, I mean, like it says, nothing that is in the waters above or the earth below. They still had art, but it was more abstract, or like, mosaic geometric designs and whatever. There was no depiction of people, animals, whatever, in certain times. Yeah, Joel says sculptured image, but the text says or any likeness. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the correct interpretation, to not have any artistic expression of
Go ahead.
people, but that has existed as an interpretation. I don't think it's, like I said, it was more extreme. And I think the only lasting interpretation, I guess, or the most common and lasting, has continued to be, that we don't pray to sculptures, we don't pray to idols, we don't try to depict God in a human form. But there certainly has a several hundred years now, a couple hundred years anyway, tradition of synagogues having stained glass imagery, depicting biblical scenes of humans at least. Badge. Sorry, my cat is eating plastic. Okay.
Very noisily.
Yeah, she really likes, I think that's why she likes it, is the noise that it makes when she chews
Yeah.
on the plastic. Because then sometimes it'll like, a piece will break off the bag she's chewing on or whatever. And then she looks distressed that she actually like has it in her mouth. I think she just likes the crinkling sound.
Our dog used to like to do that with empty bottles. Used to
Yeah.
like to crinkle them back and forth. Just odd.
Anyway.
I
Now
mean, I
she-
assume that where it says any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth below is that not that you can't make those likenesses, but you shouldn't use those likenesses to represent God.
right.
So,
Yes, I
You
think
shouldn't-
that's a reasonable and probably well, I don't know. We can't really say what is the most whatever, but I think that would be my interpretation as well. Although Sforno says, even if you do not mean to use it as an object of worship. And the rabbis, I mean, like Talmud talks about this kind of stuff too, in terms of this is something I read in rabbinical school. It has not come up in my more recent Daf Yomi pages, so now I can't remember the whole thing. But there's like an argument about making like being a sculptor is a legitimate profession, and like does it depend on whether you're selling your sculptures to Jews or to Gentiles? Does it matter if you know the Gentile is going to bow down to it versus use it as a garden decoration? Like you can trust the Jews who would know not to bow down to it. Like, there's discussion about like how whether or not you're facilitating idol worship is a key part of determining whether or not you're allowed to make any kind of clay figure at all. Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
Well, right in the same sentence, the last part, or the waters under the earth. I didn't quite get that reference, how that relates and what it means.
I think it just means the same as any likeness of what is in the heavens above or the earth below. Like no animals, that I don't know. Like
maybe because it's under.
I think the
earth.
fact that it says that the
Yeah.
waters below the earth doesn't necessarily mean something different. It's just a funny way of expressing the seas.
Earth is here and the sea is here. Otherwise it would flow.
Sea
over.
level is lower. I don't know.
Yeah.
My Chumash says the monsters of the deep.
Really?
That's
Yeah.
below.
That's what it
Monsters.
is in the commentary.
Whales and.
Oh, in the commentary. Okay.
Yeah, commentary.
So that would be below the earth.
That's interesting. Well, Ibn Ezra says he spoke the scriptures to the land below, for the sea and the earth are one ball. I don't know what that means. I want to know where the monsters of the deep. I love that.
Huh.
I want to know where that came from. That's not in any of these.
No? And I don't see it
Safari.
from the Hebrew itself.
No. No, it just says what's in the waters below
Yeah,
the earth.
Asher Mamayim
Yeah.
Mitachat
Mitachat.
La'oretz.
Yeah.
Or maybe if they're taking that under the earth that caught David's eye very literally, and so down deep would be way under sea level would be.
Yeah.
Whales,
and
Oh, I wanted
we
to
all know
also
who
think
lives
about
down there.
Leviathan.
Yeah.
orca. Yes,
And the 70
interesting explanation anyway. What does Rashi say about that?
Rashi says, wait, I just had him open. Rashi says, nothing interesting. He's just specifying more so. Pesel, a graven image, is so called because it is a chiseled out thing, and or any likeness, meaning, the likeness of any living thing. That's what he says. Not to make a chiseled image of any living thing.
I'm
So,
kind of this. I'll share what I'm interpreting this as
okay.
as them saying, like, you will not impress your idea of what God is on me. It's nothing you can imagine. It's not like the heavens or the earth below or the under the sea.
Yeah. I like that. And I think that's sort of where most like modern interpretations land. Even, in the more traditional communities, I think that's where we're at now. But it certainly gives lots of room for other potential whatever. Yeah, Joel?
Look in the chat, Genesis 7:11, the very last line, the windows of heaven opened. That's rain.
Mhm.
We already know what that is. But right before that, it says, on the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up. What that means is it was believed or thought that most of the water comes from underground. And I
Right.
believe that's what they're saying. You can't make any likeness or from underneath.
Right.
Two sources.
Which is they lived in the desert. They didn't get they didn't get a lot of rain in the, I think, and I guess in the mountains of Ararat, there's probably a little bit more precipitation, but a lot of our texts, whether in, Kurdistan or Israel or whatever, all these places that our ancestors lived were largely desert areas where water came from mountain springs and not from rain water.
Right. From
So
below
that
the earth.
from below the earth, yeah, you had to know where to tap in. And I think also, like, it reminds me of
Springs.
in Genesis, in Parashat Genesis, Bereshit, there's there's the comment about, like, on day 2, right? Day 1 is let there be light. On day 2, the separation of the waters of the heavens and the waters of the earth. There's still no land. I think that trips people up sometimes, is we're not talking about the separation of water and land. We're talking about sky and, I guess, sea. Is it still called a sea if it's the entire globe? If there is no land yet? I don't know. But that there are different depths and heights and like meanings. What was the word you used earlier, Joel? I liked it. About Nachmanides. Mystical interpretation of what the different waters mean and grant us. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the commandments themselves?
Is there anything written or talked about with, many of the commandments are wordy, but you shall not commit a murder, adultery, and steal and bear witness is just one sentence for each, like it's self-explanatory, and we all know how it's not self-explanatory. But the whoever wrote this chose to do it that way, just very plain and simple. And
Staccato. Yeah, I think the intention is that they are, I mean, as you say, it's not really self-explanatory then, because then there's still plenty of commentary and whatever about it, but that it is so like these are just there's other things that are the basis of Judaism, or Israelite religion. They weren't quite Jews per se yet, but one God, no graven images, remember the Shabbat and keep it holy. Those are very like Jewish specific, as opposed to like don't murder, don't commit, like don't treat other people like crap. Like is a pretty straightforward, universal set of ethics. Like don't abuse other people. Don't yeah. That's those ones are like the core. And so I don't know that there is like, I'm sure there is, but I don't know offhand, commentary on like the staccato nature of those verses particularly, but that they are so universal that that's why they don't require a lot of extra explanation, and that they can be grouped together that way. And there is certainly commentary on the fact that there are more of those. I mean, they take up less space in the Parsha, but like if you line up just, like I said, that sort of visual bullet points of the 10 commandments, there are more commandments about how to treat other people than there are about how to respect God. And that is significant. So
I also find it interesting that right in the commandment, it talks about male and female slaves. Don't covet them.
yeah,
Or covet the owner of them. And it's amazing to me that slavery is right there in commandments as though it's a
right.
natural thing. And that strikes me as, I can't help but wonder if when they say slave, it means more than just slave. It means the hired people or something like that.
I mean, there is, yes, in Israelite culture, slaves were more like indentured servants.
Mhm.
They were either enslaved as a punishment for a crime, or as a means of like, occasionally, this wasn't a long period of Israelite history, but like in the period when they're conquering the land, you could take a captured, like a prisoner of war kind of thing as a slave, in that conquering period. But there was no like, certainly nothing akin to chattel slavery, which is so sadly so often our narrative of slavery as Americans. But also not even really like, there wasn't like an inherited slave class, the way even a lot of other cultures that had similar laws regarding slave, like the Romans also, they didn't practice chattel slavery the way, the Atlantic slave trade did. But if you conquered a land and took a slave, that lineage often stay in your family as a slave or servant for the rest of, as long as your family continued to have money to like be a part of the class of society that owns slaves. Like it was hard to break out of that class strata, which again, like wasn't necessarily an entirely like inherited's not the right word. It wasn't the same as American slavery, but it was so hard to break out of, as opposed to, at least the way our history is written now, that could be because we want to make ourselves look better. But generally speaking, in Jewish law, when your indentured servant has served their time, or like your prisoner of war has done their time, that you're certain they're not going to like attack you again when you set them free, not only do you have to set them free, but like you have to pay them. You have to offer them some compensation to then be able to go off and like get another job and do whatever. You don't just release them homeless. So yeah, so Israelite slavery is certainly more humane than most other historical forms we can think of. And yet, like, it is still striking that they've been free for like 10 days. Like they've barely left Egypt from their own terrible generations long inherited slavery, and they're still already just like, well, yes, obviously your neighbors might own slaves, but don't covet them. Like it's there's like thought about reforming the slave practice, but there's no question that some people are still going to get to effectively own other people. I mean, that is sort of mind-boggling. Brandy, go ahead.
I was just gonna take your comment about, a lot of the commandments being about how to treat other people. And I was just thinking that, as we said before, like this is in simple terms, like what you need to do basically in order to hold your society together. Because if you constantly are envious of what your neighbors have, you're just going to be in pursuit of this, whatever, forever. It's like an endless cycle. If you don't honor your parents, you're going to be like psychologically screwed up or perhaps never feel whole is maybe a better way to put it. But it's just simple guidelines so that everyone can live in harmony.
Yeah, there's certainly, I mean, there's a lot of commentary on that one about the coveting, because it might feel like, how can you regulate somebody's feelings? Like you can't necessarily stop yourself from feeling jealousy. But yeah, it's very clear that it's really more about not letting that drive your actions or like consume you. Not letting it deprive you of the ability to also be grateful for what you have and what God has given you. Don't let it change the way you treat those people that you might be jealous of. Like it's not necessarily, I have maybe some opinions about certain people this might apply to currently in our economic system, but it's not inherently a like judgment value that someone is wealthier than you. Like it doesn't mean that they look down on you or that they're bad people or whatever. Like it shouldn't change how you interact as equal human beings. I don't think that applies to Jeff Bezos, who actively profited off of other people dying and going bankrupt. I think it's fair to say his wealth has made him a bad person. But that's a fringe case.
I think he has slaves too. He
He
has a
what?
lot of slaves.
Yeah,
They have to work in
absolutely.
distribution centers. They barely have any money. He doesn't
They don't
even.
get bathroom breaks.
They have to
They're
go
dating-
and live in West Philadelphia. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something I think we don't talk about enough is it like to that tirade I just had about Israelite slavery looking different, but still being slavery, still essentially being someone owning another human being. Like that still happens today, and we ignore it because it doesn't look like how we think of slavery per se. But yeah, things like company towns are basically coming back around in fashion. Like that's not okay. That's not, or the exploitation of prison labor, or um, and then there's also like human trafficking and actual more explicit slavery, but it's so under, in the whatever. It's illegal, so it doesn't really happen. Well, we know it does. So, those are things that we need to confront as well. If we're going to talk about these texts about reforming slavery, we need to be aware of where it still exists today and how like you can't reform it. You have to be very actively interested in abolishing all forms of it. Any last thoughts about the Parsha before Debbie, go ahead.
Just at the last verse, when I was reading it, I was glad that the 10 Commandments left out the stuff about sacrificing burnt offerings. It didn't make it into the 10 Commandments, whereas, and I thought that was very good.
Yes, there are obviously there are commandments regarding that in Leviticus, but largely that's not the bulk of our commandments. And I would say like the most important, not next week, but coming up. Hold on, let me look at a Parsha list. Keep Cal. Torah readings. All right. So right now we're in Yitro. In about a month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, more like 2 months. We'll come to Kiddushim, which is our holiness code. That is, Rashi says is like a reiteration of the 10 Commandments. And it's like not really, it says entirely different things, but in this idea of that this is the core value of what it means to be an Israelite or a Jew. And that too, like doesn't really have, even though it's smack dab in the middle of Leviticus, it doesn't have really any ritual law. There is some stuff about like profaning the name of God or whatever, but mostly it's about person to person, that we have countless commandments in our, in the whole Torah that might be about God or sacrifices or whatever, but the ones that we clearly elevate that have more lasting significance, that we say things like the 10 Commandments or the holiness code, it's about being a good person to other people. So I think that's, it's very significant. Says a lot about Judaism. So there you go. So we'll see you all again next week.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Have
everybody.
a good week.
Bye-bye.